With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoweh's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful inns for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more. Welcome, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and I'm with my friend S.J. Jennings, and we're in the studio talking about the masculine journey, and it's been good. It's been fun. It's been incomplete in many ways. You can't cover these stages, a decade of a man's life,
in 45 minutes.
In 45 minutes.
There's no way.
Even today, we're going to do part one of a two-part series on the warrior stage.
Yeah.
And, we do conferences on this stuff, whole conferences.
Yeah, we could have done probably 10 podcasts on each stage, but it was a great start. I mean, you, me, Gary, just kind of doing the overview. And
that's important to see the overview. You're a story. Mm-hmm. You are a story.
Yeah.
Your life is comprised of stories every day. Mm-hmm. If not chapters, or paragraphs. The older I get, there's a prequel now.
Right.
50 some years of stories that have led me to this space. I mean, we ask at our conferences, SJ, we ask all the attenders in that intro opening welcome session. So what are the odds that you've interpreted your life accurately?
Yeah, and everybody kind of nervously laughs.
There is a very interesting murmur of laughter, right? Of, oh my gosh, I haven't thought of that.
Right.
And when we do think of it, that's the invitation to walk with God, right? What in my story has happened to me? That's first. Mm-hmm. And then what in my story that's happened to me that I possibly could be carrying with me, misunderstanding, mishandling, and bringing forward into these other stages. So, when we look at the stages, let's just kind of throw them out there again, the stages of the masculine journey in the order that we've been exploring them. So there's the sage stage. This is... And every one of these stages is not just a decade. There's overlap. There's late bloomers. There's early bloomers. There's early bloomers, sure. Right? And some, as we'll explain in a minute, have arrived at stages prematurely, others late.
I've heard from a couple of listeners, too, and if you wanted to email us, it's exploringmore@zoweh.org. But I've heard from a couple of listeners, how come you started with the last stage and worked your way back? To be perfectly honest with you, it was because Gary Barkalow was in town.
Yeah.
And we wanted to talk to him about that stage, so we started there. We wanted to hear from him about the overview, and we wanted to hear about the sage stage, because that's the stage he's in.
Yeah.
So we started there, worked backwards chronologically.
If you want a more philosophical reason than that, that is a great reason. It's true.
Yeah.
And so taking advantage of that. But the other is that we're going to end with the most important stage.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
where
that's true.
So many things can go wrong.
Yeah. And when they do,
boyhood,
carry it with you through all the other stages.
And it goes, so we're kind of moving from the top floor down, if you will, to the foundation of boyhood. Mm-hmm. And, there's a reason why they call them the formative years, and we'll move that direction in the weeks ahead. Mm-hmm. But the sage stage, this is probably late 50s, maybe early 60s on. Mm-hmm. And it's all the wisdom that's been gained. It's all the hardship it matters, and that we need men and women in that stage to offer what they know, to share from their experiences that they're not over. It's not retirement. They might have transitioned out of a job or a role that they were in, but they're not retired from life, and they're needed. And this is a stage that can be hard because our culture lives far more in the warrior, king, lover stages than it does appreciating our sages, appreciating those whose shoulders, as some would say, we're standing on.
Right. Yeah, many guys, and I think Jim even talked about it a little bit when we were talking about the sage stage, just talk about retirement.
Yeah.
And now I get just kind of fade away rather than, wear out.
Yeah. Tom has, so these men that are in that king sage transition and sage stage, they know other sages that their comments about that stage has been very hard to listen to. That's how grandpa feels. Mm-hmm. That's how grandma feels. And yet they're so needed. So the sage stage and then king stage, which is you are in a place of influence. It could be a position, a role. It could be financial. could be relational, but every man has a kingdom. And we're talking about the masculine journey for these purposes. And yes, there's a translation into the feminine, but the king stage is, we looked at Genesis 3. Our original job description was to reign and rule. He's the kings, capital K, of small k kings, Jesus. And he wants to impart to us some authority, some power, some influence. You know, there's a part of this new book that I'm working on called King Me. And it's really about this stage and what the warfare is against a man, as well as it seems like God's love is absolutely unconditional. He loves us unconditionally. But the scriptures seem to be pretty clear about there are conditions on what he will entrust to you and where you are in the journey. And the king stage is a place where that's kind of either on display or not. Now, you can build an influential kingdom and not be walking with God at all.
Sure.
You can have all kinds of power and authority and somewhat control but there's another kingdom that could be operating in that space.
Yeah, and your influence in the kingdom may not amount to much at all. You know.
That's right. But an empire of this world is expansive.
Right.
You know, so that decade of probably in a man's 40s through his 50s, maybe early 60s. So there's a lot riding on these earlier stages that we're stepping into now. Lover comes before the king stage, and then the warrior. And the lover stage kind of overlaps. I mean, many of us we jumped into the lover stage, boyhood, lover stage.
Or were shoved. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great point, SJ. Boyhood, then lover. I mean, we became awakened to beauty. We became aware of beauty. Many of us wanted to consume it. I mean, this was, some of the conversation we got to have with the girls.
Look to it for affirmation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talking about how this looks around Valentine's Day, our Valentine's Day podcast. That was all about the lover stage. And, where a king is, how that stage has been handled. So everything prior to king stage, lover, warrior, ranger, and boyhood, it plays out in that king stage. Are you bringing luggage? Are you bringing baggage? Those
Scars,
are different,
open wounds.
Are you bringing experiences that you've learned from, or are you just that hard at learning some of the things life is trying to teach us in terms of relationships and how to handle hearts, how to handle your own heart, all of those things. So this is a big, big subject. I mean, they have degrees in universities on developmental psychology and sociology and a lot of things, but there's a spiritual reality to this, and that's what we're exploring. That's what we're talking about, the significance of these stages and how they relate to one another, how they blend, how they set up the next stage, and what's broken early, if not treated or healed, mended.
Or, incorrectly, it's not set properly, the broken bone's not set properly, you walk with a limp your whole life.
Yeah, you're compromised.
Yeah. So before we get into that, we the last couple of weeks on the Exploring More podcast, we had interviews from Gary Barkalow at the Noble Heart, part of the Zoweh team as well, because we were out on mission for the hearts of, 416 men or something? Yeah. I mean, at the Heart of a Warrior Encounter East in Young Life Camp in Virginia. We saw a lot of that, what you were just talking about, what we were just talking about. Yeah. These men came in, and even men that have been to the weekend multiple times, 2, 3, 4 times, more than half of the attendees were first-timers. But even the veterans, the goal is to uncover more and more of these wounds and bones that weren't set properly and all that. And God did some really incredible things last weekend. So we appreciate your patience and waiting, allowing us to throw a couple of Gary's interviews out there while we were out on mission. And just want to thank you for your prayers, your prayer support. If you're a financial partner, we want to thank you for that, because you are the ones that put bullets in the guns, and
the ammo,
bandages in the first aid boxes. So we thanks to you guys.
I would say about that, SJ, it was just fun to meet men there that heard us or found us through the Exploring More podcast. Like that was their entry point. Yeah. And maybe the YouVersion Bible app you're SJ.
Yeah. I had one guy come up and do that kind of thing, like, man, I love you guys on the Exploring More podcast. And, it was really fun to hear that and hear what had touched his heart and what God was up to in his life. It was fun.
And that was an environment that we try to create so that men can connect with God. Their stories, the story God is authoring, and telling this love story, as we've talked about many podcasts, in this great love story in the midst of a fierce battle. So these characters, even these stages that we're talking about, that's the story they're in, from boyhood to sage. And when we examine the warrior, let's just talk about it a little bit, what the warrior stage is. I mean, this would be somewhere in the middle teenage years, maybe sometimes it comes early, and goes up. Really, it goes up through even a king stage. Kings need to know how to fight. And that's what we're talking about. What are we up against? What's the battle about? And a man needs to know the answers to those things and how to fight them. How to guard. Proverbs 4:23, above all else, guard your heart. Right? I'm sending you, Jesus says, I'm sending you as lambs, sheep among what? Wolves.
Wolves, yeah.
And how I want you to be as innocent as doves and as cunning as snakes. These are Jesus' illustrations of him giving his friends his power and authority as if they're going to need it. And that's why the warrior stage is really critical. I don't want to get into the ranger stage too much, but the transition from the ranger and discovering a boy, a masculine heart, discovering adventure, and then discovering that the world is not safe. That's what we mean by the warrior. The warrior comes and has to come because he sees that there are injustices in the world. People sin every day, SJ, every day.
Yeah.
And some of it is absolutely horrific.
So I think as you say that, man, during the transition from ranger, maybe the transition time, and again, it's all kind of hazy, right? There's no hard and fast transition year, if you want to say.
Right.
But does the transition come, do you think, with authority and responsibility as more and more of that is granted?
That comes a little bit later in the warrior stage. What comes first is the disruption that, wait, in third grade, we were friends. We were all friends. And now it's seventh grade, eighth grade, and you don't want to be with me. I don't fit in your group. You won't play with me. We can't hang out anymore. You know what I mean? All of us, I mean, that's why junior high and high school is so brutal. To all of us. Very few of us sit on the top of that pyramid, and we're lost to some degree by the segments that tend to come. I mean, you go to a kindergarten class, they're just all playing.
Yeah. Yep.
You come to a junior or sophomore high school class, or you walk the halls, and you'll see the segments, the segregation, the different economic
cliques,
yes, it's just
and the way that the separation is, the way it's communicated, the way that it's brought forth is different now in a lot of ways, but it was the same in many ways when we were in high school.
It may weigh a little more now and be a little
comes
harsher,
earlier maybe.
But that's what we're talking about. So when you said that, because that's what leads you to the place that you mentioned of, what is my position on this? What's my responsibility to this? Bullying doesn't happen in the kindergarten class. Now you got kids who are bigger, stronger, and they just, they weeble and wobble and knock other kids over.
Right.
But we're talking about kids who, because of their woundedness and they're in this stage now, they can actually hurt other people
in a bid for control of their lives
and fear and how to be. All this stuff starts playing out from earlier stages. But the warrior stage is that puberty. 14, 15, muscles. 16, and really up through into your 40s, 50s. If you're gonna live in this story, you're gonna have to learn how to fight. And most of us didn't know that we live in this spiritual realm all the time, and there are forces opposed to us, opposed to our life in God. And you are gonna have to guard your heart. And we didn't know that. So the warrior stage is really, really, really critical in being able to overcome. I mean, what kind of word is that?
Overcome?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a triumphant, it's a conqueror, it's a...
Somehow overcome adversity.
Yeah, you're battling
oppression, unfairness, injustice. That's... Kindergartners don't worry about stuff like that.
That's right.
Second graders tend to not concern themselves with that. That's what I mean. The warrior stage is a stage that you are being awakened to the world around you, and you come to a very important conclusion that it's not a safe space. You're a young adult, maybe. Your heart is being handled by many others outside of your home. And some of our homes were battle zones. I know that. Our listeners know that. But this gets played out in that stage of, let's just call it, 16, 15 through the next few decades. And you're going to have to learn how to fight. It may be to fight for truth or fairness, the rights of others, the protection of others, people who are physically weaker, or in some ways they're being looked over, or even worse, they're somehow being discarded. And it's a stage, too, where I like what you said about physically, bodies are changing, you're getting stronger.
Shoulders are getting broader.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
And someone, you're actually leaning in to some disciplines. The warrior stage, you're in a stage where you're having to exercise wisdom, choices, disciplines. If you stay up till 2 a.m.,
Going to be hard to get up for school.
You're going to, or a job.
Yeah, or a job.
You're going to pay the price.
You get a driver's license.
Yep.
You're behind the wheel of a car. That's a huge responsibility.
So you said that earlier about responsibility. Yes. This is a stage where people aren't cutting your meat for you. And sometimes in this stage, this is the difference between 1 pair of jeans and 3. Do you have a job? Are you working? Do you know what it is to bring, some kind of financial resources so you have some money to do some stuff? Because mom and dad aren't paying for that.
Gas in the car, movie night, or whatever.
Yeah. The warrior stage is really, it's full of challenges, especially in the area of responsibility and of caring. You might be caring for and fighting for your younger siblings if you're the oldest. That can happen in this stage.
Sure.
How do you handle their hearts? You jumped into a king stage, but you're 15 and you're trying to protect.
Man, it makes me think of City Slickers. They're doing that whole best day, worst day. And the one guy, I can't remember his name, but the one guy, talks about his best day and his worst day were the same day. Because it was the day that his dad left and he stood up to his dad and he really became the warrior. His dad raised his hand to him to strike him and he didn't flinch.
Right. I didn't budge, he says.
And he took care of his mom and took care of his sister from that day forward. I think he said he was 14.
Yeah.
So it's his best day and his worst day. Yeah.
Because they ask him, what was your worst day?
Same day.
Yeah. I mean, this is a huge stage, huge concept. The idea that if a boy has all his battles fought for him, what would be the consequences of that?
Be in trouble.
Yeah. He doesn't.
It comes a point, there's whoever's been fighting your battles isn't going to be there.
Yeah. And then, but if a boy is fighting battles all the time,
right, that aren't his,
and nobody's fighting for him, that's another, on the both sides of the coin, that it could be very, very hurtful and very, very hard. And these battles are learned. Your convictions are learned. What is it that you want to fight for? And I think some will make the choice they'll be the center of the story, and they're going to fight and battle for their promotion. And yes, some of them, it's true. It's had to happen. You needed to fight and guard yourself, protect yourself from some of the evil influences. But on the other hand, the warrior is one who knows how to fight for the hearts of others, that it's not all about him all the time, and that there are those who need protection. There are those who need provision. I remember a movie way back, this is 80s, The Bodyguard.
Oh, yeah. Kevin Costner, right? Wasn't it?
No, this is,
It was Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston.
Yeah, that's another one. That's another
Different
one.
Bodyguard movie.
Yeah. But My Bodyguard was about a kid who was getting bullied and, went and asked the biggest kid in the class that everybody was afraid of and basically paid him gave him his milk money to just protect him. And they became best friends.
I was just watching another movie. This guy was in jail and wanted to, his first day, go out and pick a fight with the biggest guy in the cafeteria. Yeah. And he just got pummeled. And the older, wiser guy that he's sharing a cell with says, you don't have to be the biggest guy on the cell block. You got to be friends with the biggest guy on the cell block.
That's a great warrior lesson, right?
Yeah, it is.
There's a ton of those. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this just a little bit more on this stage. I mean, there's ideas of fairness, those who are less fortunate, those who are poor. I mean, warriors begin to have causes that matter even outside themselves. And the hope is that they have good kings. That there's somebody in authority that's been given the ability to preside over that classroom or over that team.
Whether it's a father, hopefully, or a grandfather, maybe a relation, but it could be a coach, it could be a scoutmaster, it could be a kind gentleman at church or something, some organization that just takes a liking to you. What's his name? Mr. Miyagi and Daniel,
I just was
right?
thinking of Karate Kid. It's such a great. That's a warrior.
Oh, man.
You say coming of age, but really, so many coming of age stories that we've embraced for years and years and years until are warrior stories.
That's right.
It's coming into that stage, coming of age, and how that transition goes, and he has an advocate.
And he's so disoriented. The young man, I think it's Daniel, right?
Yeah.
He thinks that this guy's just using him to do his chores. Yeah. And he's so unaware of what's really happening.
The karate lessons.
He's learning how to be a warrior when he's painting the fence.
So good. Yeah. So such a great story to explore. And we have to look at Jesus in all of these stages. But and as we look at Jesus, the invitation is to look at him as a warrior. I mean, he came to set prisoners free, sight for the blind, liberty for the oppressed. So no wonder Palm Sunday was such a big deal. Yeah. No wonder they wanted to make him a king.
Right.
He had fought for so many against two very, very harsh systems, maybe even evil. One was the religious system of Judaism was harsh, and worse was Rome.
Right.
The Roman Empire. So
one attacked the soul, one attacked the flesh, and they were,
point.
The Romans were just brutal. I mean, they came up with crucifixion.
As long as you stayed in line and under their authority, and Jesus went against the grain there. I mean, we've heard this for years. I mean, you don't crucify Mr. Rogers or Captain Kangaroo. That was Philip Yancey said that in his book, The Jesus I Never Knew. You don't crucify a nice guy. A rebellion was afoot. A reformation, the first Reformation. Before Martin Luther, there was Jesus. This is a troublemaker.
Yeah.
And Jesus didn't back down from the battles with the Pharisees.
No, but, they were largely, until towards the end, they were largely, verbal, spiritual, sparring matches, battles. But when he comes back, he's coming back in the more classic version of what a warrior when we think of him. I mean...
Yeah. No greater love, Jesus says, than he who lays down his life for his friends. That's a warrior mentality.
Yep.
And that's why we love the Bravehearts.
Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah, Saving Private Ryan.
I mean, all those guys, except for one, gave up their lives for that mission.
Yeah. And so the warrior it's just a very hard stage, a very good stage. And I want to talk about how this stage is compromised when we come back from this break.
Marriage may be the most sacred of all human relationships. Two people coming together as one. There may not be anything more powerful than two people walking with God together. It's kind of mind-boggling, actually. And because of the power and weight of marriage in the kingdom, it should not come as any surprise that marriage is violently opposed. It's a favorite target of the enemy. We believe this is why you don't have to look very far to find a marriage that is in trouble. Assaults on marriage and challenges to marriage are everywhere. But we at Zoweh know there is a way for couples to make a comeback. Learn how to fight back, enjoy being restored, and actually thrive in the midst of day-to-day battles of life. Marriage is worth fighting for, and having the right weapons and tools, training and orientation is crucial. That's why we created the Rendezvous Project, a 12-session video series recorded live during one of our recent Rendezvous Weekend marriage conferences. Through the Rendezvous Project, we hope to empower marriages to either take a weekend away together and host your own marriage retreat, or journey together in a weekly small group, discovering your true heart, the deep and beautiful heart of your marriage, the context of the larger story your marriage is in, and how to walk intimately with God together. For more information about the Rendezvous Project and to stay up to date with the latest news leading up to its release, visit therendezvousproject.com. So welcome back, Exploring More podcast listeners. As we jump back into our discussion, Michael and I, this is SJ, about the warrior stage. I found this definition, Michael, and I thought the conjunction that they used was really interesting. So the definition of a warrior, if you just search it on Google, the first one that comes up is a brave or experienced fighter. A brave or experienced, not brave and experienced, brave or. So
I could go with either and or and.
I'm just saying, I remember fighting some battles and running in with no experience whatsoever and getting thrashed in a lot of ways. But, as you fight more and more battles, you become more and more experienced.
That's right. How many of us have not spoken out of turn passionately? Been just disruptive. That's not right. And gotten in more trouble.
Right, because we didn't know the whole story.
So, but so even learning how to wield your passion, learning how to wield this, and finding the moments to really fight. I mean, Jesus walked away from a lot of this stuff, right? I mean, but he had an effect on people in the way that he fought battles, in the way that he brought into the light injustices. I mean, what's the whole woman who's about to be stoned, right? What's all that about? And why and how could Jesus have a presence where all those rocks are dropped? And he says to her, where are your accusers?
I like to think in that moment when he was, drawn in the sand, it wasn't just a line. He was writing people's names.
Something got these guys' attention.
To convince them they were no different than her.
Yeah. I've heard theories on that. That's good. That's good. And this is why we're such proponents of it's not if you're wounded, it's when. Mm-hmm. How bad is it?
Right.
And the heart doesn't know a trauma scale. To the heart, being shamed in a classroom, being shamed by a coach, being shamed by your peers, being shamed by your mom and dad, they all have weight to them. They all have weight, and maybe different weights. But the heart feels that, logs that, and comes up with a system to not do that anymore or to somehow protect itself. How am I going to avoid this again?
So that's a great opportunity to talk about one thing that a warrior learns to do is to recognize the tactics of the enemy.
Yeah.
Right? So the enemy comes against you in certain ways.
Yeah.
And will come and use that idea. I love how you said, that the heart doesn't have a trauma scale. Trauma's trauma, but what the enemy convinces us to do is to get into a spirit of comparison.
Yeah.
So, my trauma, I look at that and I hear your story and I compare my trauma to yours and I say, well, I guess I didn't really have it that bad, so I don't need to talk about that or deal with that, or I must not be wounded.
True. And if this is your first podcast with us, you're really jumping into the middle of a movie.
Right.
And yet there is an enemy. And I love that you brought it up, SJ. This is real exposure in this stage to evil. Mm-hmm. That's why a warrior's needed. There is an enemy.
Yeah. There is evil that does not sleep.
Yeah. And it's not just social injustices or as awful as our culture and society is when we sin against one another, use one another. But there is a mastermind behind that, a fallen archangel, Lucifer, now Satan. A third of the heavenly host have gone down with him. There's a battle that has now created two kingdoms, and they are at war over you. And there's so much more to talk about. There's other podcasts that we've talked about that.
Yeah,
but you bring
two realms, two kingdoms.
You bring it up at a great moment because this is the stage of the rude awakening.
Right. That's a great way to say it. It really is. And childhood kind of.
And there is Darth Vader. There's Darth Vader in the galaxy. There's Commodus, in the Roman Empire, right? There's the Wicked Witch and her sister in Oz.
Yeah, Longshanks.
Longshanks in Scotland and England. I mean, this is the villain in our story. And so our scriptures help us here. They just go on and on about this whole idea. You're going to have to fight and know what you're up against and use weapons that Jesus has given us. Ephesians 6, Corinthians has its list. I'm losing the passage right now, but it's our struggle's not against flesh and blood. Right. But it looks like it.
Sure.
It feels like it. He said that. She did that. And what we're advocating is under the influence.
Yeah, if you think you're the center of the story, you're living in way too small a story.
Or that other people aren't under the influence of evil. I mean, I know unchecked, unobserved, my false self has the ability to hurt anybody at any time.
Sure. Yeah. Mine too.
And that entity, as a kingdom man, that thing is not me, but it looks like me, sounds like me. And if I don't see it working, that's the warrior. The warrior has to see this internal civil war.
The enemy within
this thing inside that they're battling. And that's a rude awakening.
Yeah, the guy who says that he doesn't have a false self is being led by his false self, right?
Yeah.
I mean...
Yeah. I usually just kind of walk away from that guy with a handshake. Hey, man, it's good to meet you.
Yeah, right.
You know, and you want to go talk to his wife and his kids and say, or the people that work with him. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's not my vendetta.
We've all been that guy.
But the warrior realizes through experience that he is in a space, a fallen space. He needs his wits about him. He needs to understand what he's up against. And physical realm and spiritual realm, if we misunderstand how this works, then we're going to be POWs. We're going to get hurt. And if we become POWs and we get hurt, guess what we're going to do to others? We're going to put them in prison. We're going to throw down on them. It's going to be bad.
Yeah.
You know.
So it's interesting. This movie's 20 years old now, which is hard to believe, but The Matrix came out 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I watched it again the other night because it had just been a long time since I'd seen it. You want to watch a movie where a guy is becoming aware of the battle around him and how to fight in it? That's a great one to check out.
Well, training, we can talk about that. I mean, Morpheus is going to train Neo up. Jesus is going to train his disciples up. And when he does, Jesus gives his friends his power and authority, sends them out to do what he does. Sight for the blind, heal the brokenhearted, cast out demons, take authority. That's what they come back saying, oh my gosh, this was so crazy. This is what we got to do.
Yeah. You don't have to dodge bullets. When you're ready, you won't have to, right? And this is I found this quote too, Michael, which ties into what I was talking about with The Matrix. Nobody is born a warrior in exactly the same way that nobody is born an average man. We make ourselves into one or the other. And Neo chooses to take the red pill, but he very easily could have taken the blue as well. And I think many men do and would rather just get plugged back in and not engage in the battle that they've been shown. My
only caveat to that is that the idea that we make ourselves, there's a lot more going on than that phrase.
No doubt.
You know, that's
but
it.
The reason I shared it is we have free will. We have they have the ability. Now, once you make the decision, I mean, I didn't know what I was in for when I decided to follow Jesus, right? None of us did. Once you make the decision, it's him, right? But you do have that free will to decide to engage in this battle. And unfortunately, I think what we're seeing is that many men, for a myriad of reasons, are not engaging.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of a choice if your will's hijacked, it's hijacked. So you really don't have much of a choice until you wake up and see that it's been taken.
Right.
The enemy has somehow compromised, and you've lost battles in this stage that you need to go back and fight. That's what's awesome.
Yeah, we hear so many guys say,
that's what's awesome about this.
How come I'm only hearing this for the first time now? Why didn't I hear about this before? You know, maybe you weren't ready to hear it.
Not.
Maybe it was,
Yeah. I mean, I don't have those answers, man, but I do know you're here. Mm-hmm. What do you want to do now?
Mm-hmm.
If you find out that your heart has been raided by an enemy who's come to steal, kill, and destroy, and that's a rude awakening, take a couple breaths. Okay, now let's help you take back ground that was lost because you didn't know how to fight. You didn't know how to defend. You didn't know how to guard your heart. You didn't have a shield of faith. If you just didn't know how it all worked. And that's what we're advocating, you know, that these stages have their recovery. They have their restoration.
Oh, yeah.
And the warrior stage is so compromised when shame enters, when fear, I mean, even when you attempt to take a stance, which is a good thing, but the powers that be, they have the ability to walk you out of the classroom or somehow shame you. You can easily misinterpret. I'm trying to do a good thing, and this is what happens. Pretty much in every story that's worth telling, that's what happens.
Right. Yeah.
The good actually gets somehow
arrested.
Yeah. It gets diminished by a system or somebody who's working within that system. And that's a tough one for the warrior. It doesn't mean that what you stood up for, that wasn't good. It just means it didn't go well. But that's how so many first times go.
I was just going to say that, man. That's so true, especially early on in this stage. So much of our, 15, 16 to 25, that first, decade of turning into a man and turning into a warrior, it just doesn't go well.
Yeah. There's so many things in that when things are unfair. When you're little and you get the bigger piece of cake, you're excited. Actually, that's why the whole rule is good of you cut, I choose.
Right.
Did you ever have that rule? So which one of those do you want? But it's whatever piece of cake's left, at our family is one you got. But my point, I'm trying to make the point that there's an unfairness in this story.
Yep.
And God makes a very large promise that what isn't good, he's going to make good. And there's hope for the warrior.
Yeah.
There's hope for the king. There's hope for the sage. And those stages, there's hope for the lover that there is an injustice. There is a villain in the story. There is fallenness. And so we need to learn the tactics of the spiritual realm and the King of Kings. How do we walk well in this story and overcome shame and overcome fear?
Yeah.
I think
Shed it. Take it off. Yeah. How do you get rid of it?
Another question I want to bring up, SJ, is this is a stage where a question, a boy and a girl asks, do you see me and do you love what you see? This stage in development, another question comes, and it's the question, do I have what it takes and can I come through? Why are those the questions?
Do I have what it takes and can I come through? Why are those the questions? Because I believe it's because you're being bestowed, as I mentioned earlier, more authority, more responsibility. The king, large K, a capital K, king is trying to prepare you for what is coming down the road.
That's right. The environment needs that question. You have to answer that question. The environment is more hostile, and he wants to equip you for that. I love what you said. He wants to endow. He wants to give you what you need. But if you don't know you need it, and he gave it to you, it wouldn't matter.
Right.
So there's some kind of wild experience of unfairness, injustice, even shame, guilt, and fear that says, I don't want to live this way.
Right.
And I want to be an advocate for something more, something better.
I love something you said this weekend, and you've said it before, and it's always sticks with me and has stuck with me for years is, there are things in life that happen to us that are not God's will. Sin is not God's will.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
However, when things happen to us or are done to us or are thrust upon us that are not God's will, that's when he deploys his way, right? And we're learning that more and more as we step into this warrior stage, that things are not always going to be fair. Things are not always going to go well. And just because you say this too, just because things are not going well doesn't mean they're not going according to plan. You have to learn in this stage, and it really is like no other, I think. You've got to learn that just because things aren't going well doesn't mean you're not going to get something out of it. Right. You're not going to learn something, that God doesn't have something greater in mind for you.
Yeah. So this stage is hard work. There's discipline. There's not being deterred. There's moving forward. I think about trying to swim out past, kind of the waves. And the frustration of that, time and time again, getting kind of pummeled to what are you doing every time you set out to do that? You're getting stronger. You're becoming a better swimmer. You're learning. So there's a discipline to this. That's why athletics are important, and also they can be so wounding in this stage. Music and learning to play. I mean, these are the ages that so many things are tried and attempted, and sometimes we quit. Sometimes we lose heart. And it's not always because, it didn't go well from my end. Sometimes it doesn't go well because of a teacher that we had or an instructor or a coach. I mean, we hear this all the time. And so you want to be, as a parent, you want to be paying attention to this stage. You know, I mean, that's another benefit of exploring these stages. What are the stages? What are my kids going through? And how do I parent them appropriately through this stage?
Yeah, you're really learning how to fight for the hearts of others in this stage. And for most of us, for a large majority of us, it's from kids.
So turning off the TV, turning off Xbox,
Yep.
turning off the phones, the discipline of that is hard. You're going to get resistance from your kids. But making them take lessons from somebody who's really not good for their heart.
Oh, yeah, I heard that lesson.
You want to be a parent who's on that and can see. It's not that we're quitting piano. We're just not taking from that teacher
anymore. We're not taking
anymore.
any more abuse from that.
Right. Or coach or whatever. And that's a hard thing when you're in a school and the coach has been in the position for 20 years and we see the abuse of power, but it's my point is it's often displayed in this stage where boyhood is kind of mom and dad's realm, but now you're moving outside of the gate, the fence, the driveway, and into something so much larger.
Well, you learn too in this stage too, Michael, that, okay, that coach said this about me back when I was 15 years old, and now I'm 30, and it's echoing, but then I get to say, wait a minute, I wonder what happened to him.
Yeah, the coach. Yeah. That became he had a coach that was that
like
way,
that.
or
right.
Yeah,
right.
Those stories get to be really, really interesting. The causes, the effects. I like the idea, SJ, of you should not be spared from failures or even bad kings. There's actually important lessons that failure's not the end of your life, rejection is not the end of your life. And that somebody can come around. I think what we're talking about is that somebody's there to help a warrior interpret well.
Yeah. Hopefully a good king or a sage, right?
And when you don't, then here we go. 30 years later, we're helping men interpret some of these stories. And they didn't have it wrong, but they've lived with it wrongly for years and years and years.
Right. Their interpretation.
And it's somehow a verdict
wrong.
on them.
Yeah.
And that is very, very susceptible in this stage.
Yeah.
Because people's comments, the way they're handling your heart, it can feel pretty powerless when, no, you didn't cheat. You weren't cheating. And yet you're being accused of a crime in a high school classroom that you didn't do. And you were either got an F on that test or, those are
in school suspension and all that. And wrongly accused, wrongly judged, wrongly punished. Yeah.
Yeah. And so those are important. Hopefully when you're the teacher, when you're the one administering, you'll remember that and can take that into account when those under your jurisdiction, those under your realm as a monitor or moderator or a king in that stage. Does that make sense? There's a lot going on. There's just so much going on. And that's why Jesus came to heal the brokenhearted.
Right.
It assumes that there's brokenhearted people.
We need a savior, right? Because there's so much going on.
We do. And
so much brokenness.
And that's why I think the triumphant Christ, the Savior of the world, there's a warrior element to him.
Sure.
And he knew it. And I think it was more than ministry. Sometimes ministry it doesn't carry with it the weaponry. It sounds like collars and liturgical.
Yeah, it's that picture of the Iowa corn-fed Jesus. He's got the flowing blondish hair and
and glow.
He's kind of glowing, a little bit, and just kind of. We focus so much on the meek and mild. And there's a book out there, Jesus, Mean and Wild, too.
Yes, I saw that, and I think there's even in Heart of a Warrior, we went to some lengths to what's your image of him,
right?
How do you see him? And if you're the one being oppressed, then you want somebody to bring the jailbreak, somebody with some power, somebody with some authority who can overcome what has overcome you. And that's where I think this stage really we relate. I think we need to project some more of this on Jesus than has been. And yes, he's kind and he's loving. He's fierce.
Yeah, I love the
Lion of Judah. Lamb of God.
I just read recently again, kind of a expository about Jesus in the market when he's flipping tables and all that and cracking a whip and what I didn't realize before he got up and started doing that, he's just sitting over in the corner, actually weaving this whip together.
Yeah, so the premeditated would be the term. Premeditated.
There,
He knew what he was going to do.
I just get this image of him kind of looking over the top of his glasses. Not that he wore glasses, but you know what I mean? Just kind of like that.
Yeah.
Hey,
as soon as I'm done with this.
You better knock this off because I'm going to use this thing.
Yeah.
Hey, so like you said, there's so much in this that, we need Jesus, obviously. There's so much in this warrior stage. We've got to land the plane right here so that then we can pick up next week with part 2. So exploring more, listeners, we're really thankful for you. If you would take the time to rate and review us on iTunes, that would be awesome. If you've got questions, concerns, you want to start a conversation, send us an email, exploringmore@zoweh.org. Check out everything we've got to offer you on Zoweh.org, our website, and we will see you next week for part 2 of The Warrior.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoweh.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the life of more by visiting Zoweh on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoweh on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.